What's up, guys, and welcome back to Stereotherapy. I'm your host, Lisa, and as always, I'm here with my wonderful co host, Justine. If it's your first time here, Stereotherapy is a podcast that showcases the importance of music and mental health. As always, if you're liking what you are hearing, remember to share, like, and subscribe to our podcast. It really helps us out and would mean a lot to us. You can do that anywhere you are currently listening to this or at our website at www.stereotherapypod.com. You can also leave us a rating if you really want. Let us know how we're doing, and it would really, really be awesome. And it really helps people find us that way and kind of pump us into those annoying algorithms. So definitely, if you want to do that, you like this, please do it. Today, we're going back into part two, back to the 90s. And again, I know in the previous podcast we talked about it, but I'm going to tell you there's going to be some different takes and different bands on this one. And I'm really excited. If you are just listening to this one and finding us now, go back to part one because we went ahead and did a lot of cool stuff in part one. And I guess before we get into this one too, Justine, how are you doing? What's kind of going on this lovely Saturday for you?
Oh, it's just a lazy day. I babysat really late last night, so it's just been a restful kind of day to,
Yeah.
to catch up.
No, I feel you. I told you before we recorded, I was like, "Oh, we're gonna record on Saturday. It's Father's Day tomorrow, or this and that. Oh, I want to record." And we have a guest on Monday, so I was like, "Oh, we'll record today. It'll be all good." And yeah, no, it was a struggle, but in a good way though, because now we get to do this. But it's been one of the laziest days in a long time too. So I feel you there. um, but I think this is going to be a lot of fun to get to part two. So I guess for me, I'm just gonna have to start out with, and Jeremy, if you're listening to this one, I'm giving you what you messaged me about. I'm giving it to you. But I'm gonna start out with the first band that I ever fell in love with. And I think some people know it, some people don't. If you're my friend on Instagram, you have. But I'm gonna go with the Smashing Pumpkins. And I feel anyone that knows me knows my love for the Smashing Pumpkins goes deep. I remember really discovering them through my parents and their love of all things alternative, as I've said in other episodes. And while I want to say there was some big music discovery thing going on in my house, no, I really dug in because I was at Six Flags Great America during Fright Fest, and they played Zero during that little, I don't know, was it not Teacups because that's Disney, but it was like a thing where like it spun. And I remember hearing like the beginning of it, and it was like, you want to go for a ride, and they'd pump it up. And I was like, I've heard this before. I know this, but I just loved it. And I think that was very fitting to pair the Smashing Pumpkins with Fright Fest. Like that just made sense. Um, but yeah, and then I was just dove into it, and I'm sure, like, I definitely probably heard it in the house or with the car of my mom, but that experience really had me dig into them, and I think we all have that experience with music, like, a memory, whether we hear it in a car, at a party, or concert, or wherever we find these bands, but I don't know if it was, like, whether it was Billy Corgan's voice or just the sound of the guitars, but it really just grabbed me, and I think it added, obviously the added Chicago element, just drew me in. But when I tell anyone how I listened to them and, at my young age, they would probably be like, "Yeah, okay. Yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah, sure you did at like 10, 11, whatever I was." But I am hand to heart telling that truth, 100%. But I feel like the universe was always, somehow knew, like, this is gonna be something with music, and that it's gonna follow me around and pumped me into all the greats during this era, because no matter what, I was not that pop kid. Like, again, I like pop music. I think it's fun. I'm not against it, but something about music like this, just something always came around in these weird events to lead me. But this band was the first one that I really dived into, besides Nirvana, and I would find myself listening to them at any chance I could. When G and I first got together early on in our relationship, I was like, "Hey, if we ever get married, and this was early on, so I don't know why I was thinking this, but I was like, I want to have Stand Inside Your Love in our wedding, whether I'm dancing to it, somehow it is going to be there. And I remember him listening to it because he's not really a big Smashing Pumpkins fan, but he'll listen to them and appreciate them. But I remember when he was like, he didn't say no, and he was just like, okay, all right, sure. Um, but I was like, okay, you're different than anyone I dated, and all right, let's go. The fact that you would be willing to do that for me and knowing the importance of that, let's do it. But I guess I have to say, like, something as I got older and I just really respected about Billy Corgan is how real and just honest he was about during the era of Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, and his band, and how hard it was back then, and how bands were always pitted against each other. Like, we see it now, but back then, like, it it was really bad with media and everything, and how when Kurt passed, he felt like he lost that ability to be the best, because to be the best, you have to beat the best and be better than the best. And at the time, he said, like, it was Nirvana. Nirvana was like the everything, the league of their own. And Billy really has been open about his own mental health during that time and beyond, and just how even the song Today they have, although it's like, today is the greatest day, and it's some people may view it as a positive thing, but it was written at a time when really Billy was struggling with so much, and so many, I think, didn't understand that. And he was said, in interviews before too, how it was about the day being great because it was so bad for him that what else could go wrong. And it's like listening to that when I was younger, I had no idea. And then like diving deep, I'm like, wow, there was a lot going on and during that time. And I mean, I could list all the songs that mean so much to me. And but we would be here literally all day long. This is such an iconic band. And whether it's Today or Stand Inside Your Love, Mayonnaise, Disarm, Ava Adore. The Adore album is one of my favorites and is one of the most underrated as well. Like, you hear a lot of people talk about Melancholy, Siamese Dream, but like, I love that record. um and I think they actually recently put out Atom, Atum is their rock opera, which is really, really cool. And I love them seeing new stuff now and doing things and kind of back together and back on track. And I think it's really interesting. And um, I think I'm also going to post a link to this Ali Hagendorf. And if I'm butchering her name, I feel bad. But like, I love her show. And she had Billy on, and he said so many incredible things. And I know, Justine, we were kind of tagging each other too in that. And I think if you are a fan of him, Smashing Pumpkins, you have to check them out. And I have to say, like, one of my highlights too was that I got to see them at Metro, and I'll post a picture. I have like a blurry, crappy photo, but I've said it in like a couple episodes back where how I got to go there due to a raffle, and like being in the iconic venue. It was 2010, and like it was the highlight of my concert going career was being able to see this band. And if you get a chance to see them, I think they're on like a summer tour too. And like, go see them, everybody. But I know we kind of talked a little about this too, Jesse, but I know you're a fan as well. How were they impactful to you in your life, or what do you think about the Smashing Pumpkins?
Yeah, I've been a huge fan since I was really younger too. Although I can't really pinpoint the first time that I heard them.
No
I
Six
would
Flags for you?
I don't know. I don't know if it's just like they were always there or
Mhm.
like, I don't remember my dad having any of their albums specifically. He might have had one, but it wasn't like something that he played a lot. Um, I think it was just one of those things that I had heard and I was just like, ooh, you know
Yeah,
what I mean?
right? Yeah.
Like it. I don't know. I can't remember, but I had also been listening since I was really young. But they can get both like really loud, but at the same time, just like so soothing when it comes to Billy's voice.
Yeah.
And just the way they use their instruments, it's just like a very common saying that we say as autistics is like, it just scratches an itch in my brain.
I like
Like,
that.
I don't have any better way of like it just hits my brain right, and it
Mhm.
gives me the best feelings. And their music videos were always just an absolute work of art.
Yeah.
Like, I still constantly think that Tonight is like one of the most beautiful music videos that have ever been made.
Mhm.
Um, but I also have like I'm a history nerd, and I'm a classic movie nerd too. So that added like element of that video being from like a silent movie was just like, oh my god. Like it was just beautiful, done so well. And then they have a female bassist
Mhm.
that stood out to me as well. And I know I talk about it a lot, but female representation is just, it's so important because being able to see yourself and what you consume is so just like so helpful. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To help you get through things. And so seeing like this beautiful blonde-haired woman play the bass, which like it's not something you automatically be like, oh yeah, I'm a girl, I'm gonna go play the bass. Like it's not something that you think of very often, you know. It's and it just that stood out to me as well. And I've only known 2 songs ever in my life that have my name in it.
Oh
And
my God, Justine, I can't believe I know you're
yeah,
about to say, but
100%.
I
And the fact
oh my
that that
God.
lyric actually fits my personality. And if you don't know, in the song 1979, the lyric goes, Justine never knew the rules. She always hung down with the freaks and the ghouls. And like when I realized that, the lyric, and I was like, oh my God. And the fact that it's like as a goth kid, it was like, oh my
Mhm.
God.
Yeah.
Like it's like they knew me before, you know, I was who I was. It always like had extra special meaning for me because having a name was a little different, and then having like one of the absolute, best bands have your
Mhm.
name in a song is just, oh, it's magical.
I love that because when you were about to say that, I was like, holy shit, like
Yeah,
literally
yeah.
before when I need little notes or whatever before we hop on record. I always listen to what we're going to talk about. I mean, I always, anyways, listen to it. I mean, because like the Smashing Pumpkins are a band too that like they've never left a playlist of mine. They never left anything. Like I still to this day listen to them, and I think that like I don't like when we were going to talk about this. I wanted to bring that up, and I
Yeah.
totally forgot to. And I'm like, oh my god, like that's so like that is so cool because it is, and I think oh, now I just have to listen to that one again. But, like, even, like, preparing for this, I was like, "Oh my god, they're saying Justine's name." Like, why did I not
Yeah.
know that? And I've listened to this a million times probably in my life, loved it, and like you said, like, their music videos, and I think they're just one of those bands that, like, at least for me, it's like they're so, so important, and it's like again, like, when we talk about any of these bands we're gonna talk about, that it's their voices, like, it's like or even, like, the last part we did. Take any of those bands from the 90's and it's like, they're just so unique and so special, and this band will always be, like, special, and I love that they're, like, the first band that I did fall in love with because 'cause I'm like, 1, they're Chicago, 2, they're just massive, and they're they're just so awesome, like, I love them so much, and anyone that gets to see them on this tour, I think they're coming here in August, so I'm like, "I better get my butt there."
Ooh,
Like,
should.
I thought I looked that up, and maybe I'm wrong and they're not on this, like, tour that, like but I'm pretty sure I saw that, and I'm like, "I need to go see them," and because 'cause they're just that's another thing, like, I know some people say certain things, "Oh, how they were now." Literally, like I said, I saw them in 2010. So that was not their prime era, but like by any means, but they were so incredible, like so incredible. Played over 3 hours of like material and I felt like it was amazing. So that's oh, I love that. But for you, and again, I do not know what Justine's about to say, so I'm really interested. Um what is your band you're gonna talk about?
So the first band that I'm going to talk about is Weezer.
Oh my god. I love
uh,
it.
So they're the kind of band I feel is underrated quite a bit. Like,
Mhm.
I don't know anybody who actively hates them, and I don't know how you could. Their music just makes you feel good. They've been around for a long time, yet never really show signs of slowing down. Um, I love I personally really loved when they did the Teal album, which is all cover songs,
Mhm.
but they're all songs that I've always loved anyways, so it was just great to hear them do all these songs that I already always loved, but in their voice, you know? And so I ate that album up for a very long time on like rotation.
Yeah.
Um, and I've always loved that it was great to hear them put that out for a change because I would think that would be like, like it's not so stressful to have to make a whole album of your own songs. But every once in a while, you put out a cover album, which you don't hear so many bands do so much. Like you might have like one cover song, but to do a whole album of covers, I loved that so much. But like it also went from like Black Sabbath to the Turtles, which was like I loved that so much because that just weird eclectic all in like one album, which kind of, you know, just describes my whole music personality of being just like on different ends of the spectrum was awesome to have on an album. And I also love that they even have a version of Lost in the Woods from Frozen too.
I'm literally pulling this up now because I'm like, this was definitely the era when they had Africa was everywhere, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, because yeah, I'm looking at this and oh my God, yeah, like
Yes, because if you have not listened to the Teal album, you definitely should because
yes,
it's
yes.
just oh, it's wonderful. I absolutely loved that. But they did Lost in the Woods for Frozen 2, and I personally love when bands like with people I love manage to pop up in children's stuff since I work in, my career is with children. So having those crossovers, so with kids and being like, yeah, I love this band. I've been listening to this band for years, kids. And like, but it like helps you kind of have this connection with kids. And, it also just helps us in like our field of working with kids and having that just add a little like, oh my God, is that Weezer playing
Mm. Well, that's
for Frozen too?
it's funny you bring that up too because, when Africa was everywhere and,
Yeah.
like, I remember telling people, "Weezer did not make the Blue Album for you guys all to know them because Africa. No,
No, 100%.
you need to teach your kids, Africa is great, but if you're gonna sing Africa and they're gonna be into that, slide a little Blue Album, depending on their age, educate
Oh,
them." So that but I
absolutely.
thought it was the coolest thing that Weezer did that, and there was that resurgence of Africa, but it was like I
I
remember
think
being that person.
I think I get that, but I also think that that helps make it a gateway easier for, like,
Mhm.
younger kids, which I think is important to remember because, like, I totally get that, and we kinda had that element as well with Stranger Things
Yeah.
whenever, you know, they were playing Metallica and people are like, "Oh my gosh, you only know Metallica because you watch Stranger Things." But at the same time, like, we all have this little gateway that helps us discover a band, even if it's a band that's really popular, before we get into it, and then it becomes your favorite band. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, 100%, like, Tony Hawk was that way for so many people, like, Tony
Oh,
Hawk Skater, like,
absolutely.
oh my god, I can't so I knew Goldfinger, I didn't know, like, any of that, like, for sure.
Oh my gosh, Tim till this day will talk about the Tony Hawk
See, there you
soundtrack.
go.
Yeah, no, like, whenever that came out, like, I think they remastered it or something for PlayStation, and he was playing it, and I was just like, because I never played it because I didn't have PlayStations
Yeah.
growing up, and so he was like, "You didn't know all these songs were on here?" I was like, "No." Like, I didn't have a PlayStation, but also I wouldn't have been playing a skateboard game,
Well,
so
there you go.
but, like, I thought it was so funny, but, I think there should be a little added, grace for how people discover bands, because it's like you do have to remember not everybody's gonna have this like magical introduction to like a
Right.
band. So yeah, if you discover it by, watching Stranger Things or, like, hey, I remember growing up watching Frozen 2 and I really liked that band that
Right. That's
sang
so cool.
Lost in the
Yeah.
Woods. It's just like it goes to show how much music is universal and it can
Mhm.
get to you, and it doesn't have to be this really cool introduction. It could just be in passing of something different and then it becomes your whole world,
Mhm.
which I love. I absolutely love that. But also it helps, like you said, it does help introduce things to a younger generation as well.
Yeah.
Because let me tell you, as somebody who's always been pretty rebellious, like if my dad was going to be like, you need to sit down, listen to this music, I would have been like, no,
Yeah. Yeah, right?
absolutely not. You want me to sit and listen to music? No, thank you. It had to have been on my terms and like my own kind of way of being like, oh, I like that. I think I might listen to it more. You know what I mean?
I'm that person. I'm that person where I'm like, "Oh, you must." I'm like almost like Natalie Portman in, Garden State, where it's like, "Listen to
Oh
this,
my
it'll
gosh.
change your life." Like, that's me. I'm constantly sending like, even me sending you the other day, Ice Nine Kills, Justine, "Here's a video. Here's another one. I think you like, 'cause the horror vibe," and so which I said horror, everybody. I could see someone say I said horror vibe, but horror vibe of Ice Nine Kills, and it's like that, like, I'm that person, like, and you're like, "Lisa, I've heard of it." I'm like, "But this video, Justine, look at this. Look at the shower
I know.
scene." You know?
And, and it's one of those things too. I have to remind my friends, whether it's music or if it's a show or a movie, my personality, which I'm pretty sure I have the autism PDA profile, and
Mhm.
that's personal defiance. Um, I can't remember the last what the A stands for, so forgive me for that. But it's like, oh, personal defiance autonomy, where I constantly am like, if I feel like I'm too pressured to do something or I'm asked to do something too much,
Mhm.
I reject it and I won't do it.
Yeah.
So, like, if somebody's just like, why don't you listen to that? Or you should try this band. I won't avidly listen to it unless you're just being like, for instance, how Lisa got me to listen to the newest Paramore album, where she just gushed about it so much, and that's how I got into it, not being like, "Hey, you need to listen to this." That's like, for me, it's like either you are sitting with me and you're like, "We're gonna put this on," and then I can see your joy for it, or like how Lisa gushed over Paramore's album, and that got me into it. But yeah, I'm really weird. I feel terrible too because I have so many people that'll be like, "Why didn't you watch the show?" And I'm just like, You've asked me 10 times. It's not gonna
Yeah.
happen." And it's such a weird thing. And it's like, I'm not trying to be mean. It's just my brain is just like, nope.
Yeah.
And for the longest time, I was like, is it just because I'm rebellious? Like, why do I do that? Because a lot of people don't have that way. And it's like, actually, a lot of us do. And it's the autism. But yeah, it's a whole weird thing. Weird tangent, but yes.
Right, I know, like, someone's gonna be like, "Oh, what why aren't weren't you talking about Weezer?" But no, this all
I
made
know.
sense. But so go ahead, go right ahead back to Weezer.
But yeah, no, I just love Weezer. They give you
Mhm.
the warm fuzzies.
Yeah.
They're just like, sometimes, yeah, there's some weird undertones for some of the songs, but at the same time, they're so upbeat that, like, how can you not love it? Like, it's a fun time. And I've never seen them in concert, but I would love to be able to see them in concert sometime.
Oh, and they're so good, and, it's weird, I actually have a weird thing how I got into Weezer was my dad, and I still to this day, I don't know, and I'll never know because obviously my relationship with my dad is kinda but, like, a long time ago when I was little, he used to call me Weezer. Like, Weezer was my nickname.
Oh
Why?
my
I
gosh,
do
that's
not know.
hilarious.
So when I was younger and I saw this band, right, it was Weezer, I
Yeah.
was like and admittedly, I'm gonna be 100%, the first album I really dove in was not the Blue Album or one of their favorites. It was, I can't think is it do they just call it the Green Album with the hash
Yeah.
pipe? Like, alright, so that was admittedly, the first record I got into by Weezer because I don't know, I just never really they were never really around. My family really didn't listen to them. So, like,
Yeah.
these other bands I did, but, like, knowing my dad called me Weezer, so I was like,
Oh, it
"Oh,
just
oh my
it
god, I'm."
makes you more, like, what's this about? I need to
Yeah.
check it out.
I'm like, "I need to
Yeah.
listen to this," and then, like, Hash Pipe and all this I think Island in the Sun is on that one, or maybe I'm
Yeah, it
wrong.
is. I see,
So
that's when I think they took another resurgence was
for
with the Green
oh,
album.
for
So that would
sure,
make sense. I
and it
think
was
that's when a lot of us millennials kinda got really into them. You know, like the
mhm,
Blue album,
right.
fantastic, but I think the Green album is what brought them back to, like, everybody's attention. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I had to go and then
Yeah.
I went back and I was like, "Wow, okay, so this is the Blue album everyone speaks of. Okay, this is this. Oh my god." And, like, I heard of Buddy Holly, I heard of all these things, like the
Yeah.
Undone, the Sweater Song, but, like, then going back in time, I was like, "Oh my god," and that's what I think is so cool when you discover these bands that, like, you can go back and look at their and, like, I mean, all these bands we're talking about, they had that catalog, so whether you, like, caught onto them at the crazy time they were popular or whatever, and, but I've only seen Weezer once live. It was at that, like, a radio Q101 show, whatever, the radio station, but, like, they were so good, and I have yet to see them since, but, like, they were just such a cool I think it was, like, a 4th of July thing or something. It was, like, Red, White, and Weezer or something. I don't
Oh my gosh.
like, that's, like, getting into my brain right now. I'm like, "Red, White, Weezer," but, like, no, I love them too, and, like, spoiler alert, there's a guest we're having in on Monday night that we're recording with, and he's a Weezer fan, so you're gonna have a lot of fun with him for sure, because he
Oh,
loves
yeah.
Weezer too, so that's gonna be really cool, but, yeah, I love them, but and I feel like this band is too that I'm gonna talk about is, like, very, very, different than Weezer, but again, same
Yeah.
time, which is so crazy, like, all these different bands were around, but I've gotta go, and I mean, again, people are gonna be like, "Duh, Lisa," but the band that was the lead singer was my first musical crush ever. I'm going with Bush, obviously, Gavin Rossdale. I mean, if you were a young alternative girl in the 90s, I don't care how old you were, you probably had a crush on Gavin Rossdale. I mean, I don't know I mean, Justine, did you have a little crush on him?
Of
Or
course.
okay, well, there we go. See?
Of
I was like, "Of
course.
course, how could you not?" But, for me, I mean, again, like, yes, and the sound of their music drew me in, but yes, I'm gonna be honest, I had the biggest crush ever on Gavin Rossdale, but I loved the music kept me, so, like, he kinda brought me in, this, longer hair, grunginess, uh and then when I heard his accent too, I was like, "Oh my god." But again, the music is what kept me, but I think we all too, like, some of us can relate to, like, hearing "Come Down," to that movie Fear with Mark Wahlberg and Reese Witherspoon, and I'm pretty sure that one was in there. I wanna say, and, like, that also was like, "Oh, I watched this movie," like, should I have at that age? Absolutely not, but
There was
that
a
is
lot of movies from the 90s, by the way.
Right?
If you're a younger listener, let me tell you, when it was the 90s and we were growing up, the idea of kids should not be watching this movie or
Oh.
this show, like, the it was not looked at as much as it probably
Oh
should
my
have been.
100%, and it's like, I remember that, and again, I was like, "Oh, yeah, let me, listen to this," but I think, again, I was always just gonna be that person to gravitate towards this because here I am at 37 years old, still talking about these bands today, and I can't imagine being the age I am now and, like, again, seeing Bush in their prime because there's no dig on them, I'm not saying they're bad now, by any means, from what I see, they still got it, which is alright, that's incredible, but, like, being when they were, like, the most popular, like, that would've been really cool to be in that mindset and do that, but, um, I was able to see them again at a Q101, the radio alternative station back home in Chicago, and it was just one of those things. I think I was a junior or sophomore in high school, but man, like, they did not miss a beat, and somewhere, someone probably has it, there's a video of me just sitting there, like, being so taken back, and, like, little Lisa, like, back in the day was just like, "Oh my god, is this real life?" And, like, looking up at Gavin Rossdale and Bush and, like, "Oh my god, they're playing, like, Machine Head," and, like, it was just so perfect, and I can think of so many songs that really hit, but again, "Calm Down" really hit for me, and not for reasons probably so many have, but I think it was just, like, my first memory of that band and falling in love with them, and oddly enough, I guess in doing some research too about Bush, like, that song is the first song that Gavin ever wrote. Like, ever. I know he was taking, like, lessons, like, guitar lessons, and, he was describing how his teacher was French, and like how it's a little like tricky at times, but that is the first song he ever wrote, which I think is interesting that that is the first song. But again, that one was his first song he ever wrote. Some Room, His Old Room, whatever it was. And that would become the biggest hit of their career and like a 90s anthem. And like I always just love diving into stuff like that because I had no idea that was his first song he ever wrote at all. And I mean, Glycerin, Little Things. Alien is my all-time favorite song by them. And I feel like if you didn't dive into them or you just listen to the radio hits, maybe you missed that one. But I love that song so much. And I just love that again, I was so lucky to see that one play live. But I mean, whether it was Razorblade Suitcase, 16th Stone, Science of Things, and even Golden State, because I followed Bush. I was just not in the 90s. Like I followed them. I didn't care. And I think it's again that grunge sound and that really carried over. And I think it just really pinpoints how music can impact us at any age. And again, all these bands we talk about today, I think when we look back, and I mean for sure, probably you too, Justine, like when we look back, it's like, oh yeah, like that made an impact. Maybe that's why I like this today, or I'm this way, like from this band making an impact. But um I guess, do you have any memories? I mean, other besides thinking and having a crush on Gavin Rossdale, like all of us probably listening to this, which I made a really cool reel on our Instagram, everybody. Like you should check it out because it's true. Gavin Rossdale has aged like a fine wine. But besides that, did you like the music? Were you like a fan of them at all?
Oh, of course. And, like, I would like to say that if anybody were to say that it didn't have a crush on him, they're lying.
Yeah, right?
Because, like you
100%.
said, like, he is still gorgeous to this
Yes.
day.
Oh my God,
And,
yeah.
like, you mentioned Fear, but, like, his cameo and Constantine with Keanu was
Oh,
just
that's
ooh.
right. Oh my God, I can't believe I
He was
forgot that.
he was
That's
in a suit,
yes.
and he was evil. So,
Yep.
like, uh but I actually have a Bush tour shirt from The Science of Things,
Oh my
and
God.
I didn't go, but my brother did, so I stole his shirt, and I would wear it in high school, and I still have it.
That is
And
oh my God, I need to see that shirt. I need to see that, but just because, like,
I'll have to find it.
that is so yeah, right, yeah, if you still have it,
I'll have to
because like
find it. I
right,
do have it, I just don't know where it's at,
good,
but I have
good.
it.
Oh my God, that's so cool.
I know, and I was just like, "He's not wearing it," so I took it.
There you go.
I love Bush, so I would wear it a lot. And it was huge on me, by the way, because I was really, really tiny in high
Oh,
school and now kind of fits the size, but like I didn't even care if it was so big. I would wear it all the time in high school. And I always felt like he just had such a beautiful voice.
mhm,
And I honestly was heartbroken that him and Gwen Stefani didn't work out because
same.
they were just, like, the most beautiful couple, and, like, they're both quintessential, like, 90s bands, and so they seemed perfect, but, like, of course, not anybody's perfect, but
Right.
I just really hope they're both happy now and living their best lives.
Oh, same, and, like, I recently saw a video too where back in the day, Gwen got on stage with him and Bush, at a concert and, sang "Glycerin," and
That's amazing.
a lot of people had a lot of things to say too, like, "Oh, Gwen's voice," because like, it's very different, but I
Yeah.
think it was just really cool, and like you said, it was like to see that merger of not murder, everybody, merger, because I can see someone like they had them, but, the merger of, like, No Doubt, who was so huge. I mean, they're still now, but I mean, at that time, and then Bush, and then singing this iconic song, like, that was really cool to see, and although, like, it her vocals are very different than his, but, like, that was so cool, and I felt the same way. I was like, not that I need to be invested in 90s, marriages and but,
I
like but
it's one of
that
those
that was just
things.
so cool, and I loved that, and
Yeah.
I do, and I think Bush is another band. They still get out there and, put out music, and they still play shows, and I think it's really cool that these bands are still, like whether it is Weezer or, um, Smashing Pumpkins, 9 Inch Nails we talked about in the last one, like, all these bands, Green Day, like, they're still out there doing it, and I think that also says, like, all of us that are impacted, like, we follow them, and, like, whether we wanna hear the hits, or you're a fan that, like, all their older stuff you hung out with, like, you wanted to hear, you still go to hear them. Like, I think that's so special about that, and I gotta pull that video up now. Maybe I'll post it on our little blog because it's, like, really cool to see them sing together. I love that, but I don't know, like, I'm really interested. Like, we're gonna go from Bush to, let's see, what's your next artist? I'm like, who are you gonna go to next? Like,
So the next band I'm gonna talk about is the Offspring.
oh my god, I'm gonna laugh because admittedly,
Oh,
like, I'm gonna, like, this is the one band I could not get into, and
I
I
it's
don't want
one of
anybody.
those that, like, I feel like a lot of people, you either liked them or you
Yes,
make fun of them,
yes,
or you're both, and
right,
I'm both. I will make
alright,
fun of
good.
them, but I also really liked them. So
Well, so awesome, awesome, then I'm not, like, because I
no,
was like
no. Like, I feel like they're just one of those, like, essential 90s pop punk bands, like, you think of most of their singles, and it's
Right,
like, you have that 90s pop punk sound, and that covers the era. And I was obsessed with their album Americana, which
yeah,
is the album art has a cartoon character of a boy from like 1940s-esque, and he's in a leg brace, he's on a swing, and for some reason he's holding a lobster, and what looks like an octopus tentacle is coming toward them. And it's such a strange picture, but brightly colored, so it's easy to see why it's burned into my brain.
mhm,
And everyone knows Pretty Fly for a White Guy.
yeah.
It's goofy. Like a lot of things were pretty goofy in the 90s if we're gonna admit, you
Yeah,
know?
oh, for
And
sure.
like you have a lot of great songs though, like The Kids Are All Right, Gotta Get Away, Bad Habit, and Why Don't You Get a Job?
Such a good
And
record. That was, like, it
yeah,
really was.
and it's another band that I kind of feel like is a gateway for me personally. Like getting into this like 90s pop punk kind of music was what helped me get into like the real like punk kind of scene.
Mhm.
And I didn't listen to them past the album Splinter, which came out in 2003, but I would still say they left a fairly decent impact on me. Like I said, like cuz I really believe that having that pop punk sound from the 90s helped me dive into more bands from the 80s and the 70s because I call myself goth, okay, but there is subcultures that tend to overlap. And for me, the thing that I would call myself in high school was a gothic punk because like I dove into the real punk scene like headfirst. And I definitely think that these bands that were pop punky from the 90s is the reason why I got so into like the actual punk scene.
Oh, for sure, like, I think that's the thing too, like, I loved, like, the song Self-Esteem, like, I liked that
Mhm.
album, I think it's Smash, I think, and I liked it, but it's just, like, I don't know, they were just one of those bands that I'm like, I can't, and, like, I don't know if it was, like, the cheesiness of the Pretty Fly for a White
Oh,
Guy, but
so cheesy.
even though it's cheesy, like, I still hear this, I think is that the one where it's like, he's getting a tattoo, yeah, he's getting
Yeah,
ink done.
yeah,
They
it's
asked for
like
a
the
13, but they
most
drew a 31, like
ridiculous song. And
right.
it's just like we had that a lot though in the pop
Yeah.
punk bands from the
Oh,
90s because like
yeah.
Blink-182,
Oh, right.
like
Uh,
Green
yeah,
Day did too for like
all
a
of
lot of
them.
songs. Like you had this like essential like you're rebelling, but like at the same time we're gonna just make the most stupid jokes.
Right.
And sometimes it's gross, sometimes it's just absolutely ridiculous. But it kind of goes with the rebelling kind of aspect of it. Like I'm rebelling, but I'm not taking it seriously. And
Right,
like
and I appreciate that with bands too, like, because I think, like, as much as that, I think The Offspring, anytime I've seen them on a Warped Tour or a tour, even though I'm not the biggest fan, I, 1, still respect the heck out of them, but 2, like, it's always a fun, good time.
Yeah.
So again, like, well, I'm not gonna sit here and be like, oh my God, but I remember like my high school days of the Offspring. I mean, I can't not think about a high school memory, like whether it was
Yeah.
someone listening to them or whatever it was, that like they were not in the background in some way or a movie or whatever it was. So they were everywhere.
Yeah. And I think that's like the mainest draw to it was like they definitely shaped me because they were always kind of in the background. You know what I mean?
Mhm, right. Yeah.
And no matter how silly you think this band is, because they are,
Mhm.
okay? The lead singer kind of looks like Guy Fieri
Oh
with
my.
spiky blonde hair, and I think he always wore a puka shell necklace. You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Oh, yeah, the
Like
puka.
it's
Yep.
ridiculous, but at the same time, like it's always there, and you
Right.
know the words. Like you're gonna know the words, and if you know the words to a song, you're still gonna get down to it. Okay, so like,
Oh my God. Like I said, like I just recited those lyrics. I have not
oh
listened to
yeah,
Offspring and
exactly.
God knows how
Burn it to your
long,
memory. Yeah,
but it is in my brain. And I think they're such legends too. Like the old school Warp Tour days, like when they would be
yes.
playing, like with them, it was like, oh, I want to watch them because again, like they are the pioneers of this. And while I like these younger bands, it's really cool, and that's what I loved about Warped Tour. Like, there's a lot of things I didn't like about Warped Tour, but, like, that was one thing I
Yeah,
liked was I could see these pioneers, whether it was NoFX, The Offspring, I know I'm gonna miss
Rancid,
Oh my god, yeah. Oh,
Rancid.
Rancid, I love Rancid, but, like, these
Yes.
bands that, like, they legitimately were this, and whether you liked them or not, they were so important, and The Offspring 100% is, like, such an important band to that time, and even now, like, I'm sure they're in that punk rock museum, like, they have to
Oh,
be.
they have to be.
Yeah, I gotta
Like,
look at that up and see because
I
I
know.
think they
I
have to
honestly
be.
don't know everybody that's in there. I really want to
No.
go, and
Well,
I brought it up to Tim because I was like, "Hey Tim, do
yeah.
you think sometime we could go to Las Vegas?" And he was like, "Why on earth do you want to go to Las Vegas?" I'm like, "That's where the punk museum is. I want to go." And he's just like,
And
"I don't know if it's worth it for just that." I was like, "There's
and
probably other fun things there. Come
and
on,
hey,
we
listen,
could go to the pawn shop."
Fat Mike, if you're somehow listening to this right now and you would like to come on here and talk about the Punk Rock Museum, you are more than welcome to come on here and we can discuss the Punk Rock Museum, who's on it, all these decisions. I
I
know
would
we
absolutely love
so
that
this is my call
personally.
out for him. Somehow, I don't know, I'll hashtag him and see because that would just be really cool. But yes, oh, the Offspring. Now I feel like when I'm making dinner later, I gotta like put them on, and G'll be like, "Why are you? I thought you didn't like the Offspring." Like, you
Like
know what? I was so
like,
respect.
well, we're gonna sit down and we're gonna listen to them.
Exact Oh, that's me, that's me. I'm like, "You're gonna listen." Like, but I'm awful like that. But what a different turn I'm gonna take here is my last band, and anybody that knows me knows this one has to be. And I have to talk about Soundgarden, and I think it's only fitting if I'm gonna talk about Nirvana, the Smashing Pumpkins, I gotta complete that trifecta and add in Soundgarden, because of how those bands and along with Pearl Jam, like and again, I want everyone to know too, like, maybe we won't discuss so many or a band you like. There are just so many. I mean, this was, I mean, obviously a decade, but this was just so impactful. So just because we don't talk about one doesn't mean that they're not impactful or important. All these bands are. We would be here on like 10 episodes talking about all of them. So just want to throw that in there too, because I could see, that very important. But all these bands were kings during that time. And while I know someone you want to say, oh my gosh, Chris Cornell was so handsome. And yes, absolutely he was. And that was again the first thing that grabbed me at my young age. And I was like, wait, this is what a rock star looks like. Oh my gosh, I got to get into this. But it was that voice that Chris Cornell had. I don't think we will ever hear one like it ever again. And I think if you weren't a fan of this band, you have to appreciate and respect for what Soundgarden and Chris Cornell did for music. I want to say the first time I heard them was obviously Black Hole Sun, Hello MTV, and those awesome music videos. But once diving deeper, um, and again, my little famous Lisa deep dives now, but I know it started with these bands, but I really love that song Fell on Black Days, and then obviously Spoon Man, The Day I Tried to Live. I mean, I could go on, but Chris Cornell had this way of just this beautiful voice and then absolutely go out of this world like yells or whatever we want to call them with his vocals. And the day we lost him, it was just a sad day in my house all around. People were calling me when he had passed because I had expressed how much I just loved his voice. He could just be talking in an interview and I would like shut up and listen. And I think um what Soundgarden contributed to music was just next level. And I think so many, if they didn't like this band, maybe didn't realize their impact. But if you got it, you got it. And you understood the impact of this band and Chris Cornell. And I think that that voice is something that carried me. Whatever Chris Cornell did, I was big into Audio Slave for that reason. Like Audio Slave, I was so all in, obviously like Tom Morello. And like I was just in love with that. But I know Chris also struggled deeply with his mental health and was just so open about that and everything. And I know him and Chester Bennington, obviously of Linkin Park, um, were really close and really good friends. And I think um it just spoke to when you're struggling or going through anything, having those people that understand and go through that. And I think a lot of people that liked Soundgarden, and again, I didn't dive completely too deep being how young I was and knew all the tones, but as I got older, I did. And again, I can only imagine somebody my age now going through those things and having someone like Chris Cornell be open about that. And again, I always appreciate them, and I mean, "Fell on Black Days" will always be at the top of my list of any song for me, no matter how many times you ask me, and when I think about my top voices in music and the most important voices in music, Chris Cornell will forever be up there. I never got to see Soundgarden, but I did get to see Audioslave, and my god, live, Chris's voice was something that I will never forget in my attending musical shows, concerts, whatever we call them these days. And I think it was just something that I will never forget hearing him live and just being so like, oh my God, like this is even better than I ever thought it would be. And I think being into Soundgarden really just, again, signified what it was to grow up and really gravitate towards this music and love it. And the sound of Soundgarden is, again, something I don't think we have seen or ever see again. It was just such a special time with all these bands. And I think, um, again, when we talk music and I talk then, like, it just, I can't get over it. And even now, like I was listening to a lot of Chris Cornell over the past few days, whether it was Audio Slave or Temple of the Dog is another one I know he vocaled for, but he is just so important. And I think, again, like with the day he passed, it was just so sad and we lost him. And I think it just speaks to that he was really struggling and it's just such a shame he's still not with us, but at least we still have the music. And I mean, Justine, for you, did you see any of the impact, whether it's Chris Cornell, his voice, or like Soundgarden? Or, I mean, a lot of my friends, when I was telling them I was doing Soundgarden, they're like, who's that? Because, I think some people, I don't know, like maybe just weren't into it. Where were you kind of with them?
I have to admit, I was not a fan of Soundgarden.
Yeah.
I just couldn't get into them,
Mhm.
and it's not saying that, like, that they're terrible or anything
Right.
like that. It's just I never dove into them. And
Hmm.
obviously Chris Cornell was absolutely talented and you could tell that whether it was Soundgarden or Audioslave. It was
Yeah.
just not something I got into, but my brother was a huge fan, especially of
Mhm.
Audioslave.
Oh, yeah.
Um
So,
so like I could see the impact it had on other people obviously because like he was really into them. Um but it just didn't get to me, you know what I mean? And
yeah.
I feel like that's something to, like, bring up too, like, obviously, like, I love a lot of bands like Soundgarden, and you're not gonna always like every single band in a genre, you know what I mean? And
Oh,
I
for
think,
sure.
like, that's important to bring up as well because I feel like sometimes that if you don't like a band that is widely loved in, a genre where you like a lot of the other kind of bands, doesn't mean you should feel bad about not
Mhm.
liking them. Sometimes it just doesn't hit the same as other
Mhm.
things. And but absolutely, like, obviously he had a profound impact, because I mean, even when he passed, I was like, oh no, like,
Mhm.
it's, you don't want to hear that, even if it's a band that you don't really follow. But every time you hear of a member of a band, especially when it's a lead singer, because with it being the voice of the band, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's upsetting, especially when it comes to like the grunge scene, especially. And it's always hard to hear that another one has left us.
Oh, yeah, and I think that's the thing too, like, I know for a fact, like, if I didn't like Chris Cornell and Soundgarden, like, I'm always like I gravitate towards vocals and
Yeah,
drums, like, I'm
yeah,
those 2 people, and it's like, I know a big reason why I loved those, like, loudness and those vocals, like, today, people that maybe are like, "Oh, I don't really like this," but a vocal will grab me is because of Chris Cornell, and it's like, when I look
yeah,
at that and it's like the impact again, I think it's so important you bring that up because nowadays too, people are
yeah.
like, "Oh, I like this just because it." No, 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 it's okay if you don't. No one's gonna come down
Yeah.
on you. Maybe the keyboard warriors, right? Like someone gonna come for me
Exactly.
for the Offspring comments I made, but I
I
mean, at the same
think
time.
I highly doubt it. I don't think I know any Offspring, like, hardcore fans that are going to come for you, but, like, I feel like that it's one of those things that's important to mention, because, like, even with, other singers and bands today that have a
Mhm.
huge following, that, like, don't ever be scared to be like, "It's just not my thing,"
Right,
because, like, we're human. Everybody has their own taste. Everybody, like I said, for me, it wasn't that, like, I think Soundgarden's bad. It's not that I
right,
think
for
Soundgarden's
sure.
bad. It's just, for some reason, I just never was like, "Oh, I need to go and really dive into their albums," and stuff
Mhm.
like that. And sometimes I'm the kind of person that will have heard of a band for a long time, and it's not until recently that I'll get into something. You know what I mean? Like,
Right, for sure.
it just might not have had the timing that I needed it to. And I don't think anybody should ever feel ashamed for that. And because I think, especially nowadays, like I said, with a lot of artists and bands where the fans can get really cutthroat,
Yes.
I think a lot of people get really scared about how they're gonna be perceived for liking somebody that's not liked, or liking somebody, or not liking somebody that is really well liked. And it's silly. Like, if you didn't get into them, that's okay. Like, everybody has their thing, and that's totally fine.
And that's why I like that even in this or whatever, like, whatever conversations we have too, it's like, you know what? We're honest. Like
Yeah.
when you said Offspring, it was just like, "Oh, no." And not in a bad way, but it was
I
like one of those
know.
bands. But I mean, it's
Yeah,
really great because it's like I think we go to show that too, right? Like, just because, like, it
yeah,
doesn't mean you dislike them or you hate them. It's just something is not connecting, and that's okay. Like, that's
exactly.
cool. And I think that's what's really cool about all these bands too, is there are so many different. And I'm literally like sitting here, I'm like, okay, we talked about this band, that band, this band.
And that's
What is
honestly
another
one
one?
reason that I'm sorry, that's honestly one
Yeah.
reason why I also decided, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna talk about the Offspring, because I sat before I go into my next
Yeah,
spiel
yeah.
about my next band. But, like, the 90s was so, like, wide and diverse. Like, so when I sat down
Mhm.
and was listing bands that I love that I could talk about, let me tell you how many there are that
Oh,
I didn't bring up, because, like, I really like that I didn't tell you what I was gonna say,
yeah,
but also, like, so Lisa gives me ahead of time of what she's gonna talk about,
yeah.
and I've been just extra sneaky and not telling her what the 90s bands were that I was gonna bring up, but seeing what she's going to talk about helps me, because I know a lot we both, love equally. But at the
Right.
same time, it's like, okay, I don't want to talk about necessarily like this band, because I know she's talking about this. Like, I
Mhm.
love the Stone Temple Pilots, but I was
Ooh.
like, I'm not going to talk about them for this,
Oh,
because they're similar to Soundgarden.
yeah,
And,
that's another what that's funny.
you know,
I thought you were just gonna say, "I'm doing Stone Temple Pilots." I was like,
no, no,
I thought so.
surprise.
No, No,
But,
because I
like,
thought that would be one you would, you know?
I exactly. See, like, that's
Yes.
why I was like, that's one reason why I did the Offspring. So I was like, you know what, band nobody's gonna expect for me to pull out of
Yes.
my butt right now. It's gonna
Yep.
be the Offspring. And
Yep.
that's why I threw that out because like my list was like Beastie Boys, uh Stone Temple Pilots I
Yeah.
had listed. I had, let's see, I had REM listed to
Oh,
maybe talk
wow.
about. And I was like, and then I had other bands from the 90s, which I am holding on for another
Yeah.
episode that we're talking about. I don't know if we're going to
Same.
out what that topic is yet, but I was like, okay, I'm not going to talk about
Mhm.
them because we're going to do this other episode I can bring these ones into. So that's what led me down to. So my final band is, which it is kind of related to Soundgarden. So the last band I'm going to talk about is Alice in Chains.
I'm so glad you picked that because that is someone when we first did this podcast, we did not talk about it. And the amount of people, not like that came for me, right? But they were like, Lisa,
Oh
how
no,
could
they
you
were
talk?
surprised you didn't bring it up.
How
Yeah.
could you not talk? And that's why this time around I was like, we got to break it up into two because
Yes.
of that.
Because
And
there's
I'm like,
so many.
you're so right that I didn't bring them up. And obviously with the whole mental health as well and like
Yes.
talking about that. So like, oh yes, all right. This is the redeeming thing, but it's also really cool because I want to hear what you have to say about Alice in Chains.
Okay. So, Leighton Stanley, I might be pronouncing his name wrong, so don't come for me. But like, he had such a unique voice, and the songs get really dark and deep. And I think that's kind of what always drew me to them. You have all these amazing songs like Heaven Beside You, Hate to Feel, Sludge Factory, and Man in the Box. But one of my absolute favorites has to be Down the Hole. Um, just something about those lyrics have always just got me, along with his voice, you know?
Mhm.
And I think it was so clear that not only by the music that he struggled with depression, but like he clearly had trauma. He, due to his dad. Okay, so his dad left him when he was 8. And then, of course, which I thought was super interesting because when I was trying to think of like, I'm bringing up memories because like we both kind of deep dive a little bit to think
Mhm.
about what we want to talk about.
Yeah.
And so when I looked into his story more, it had said that like when he was like, after his dad had left and he was young, it had said like, something in school, like, "What do you wanna be when you grow up?" And his was, "I wanna be a famous rock star so my dad will wanna talk to me again." And
Wow.
unfortunately, though, that did happen. So his dad saw him on a magazine and decided to get a hold of him and obviously was using him for money, and he also had, you know, an addiction to, I think it was heroin.
Mhm.
And so obviously it's weird because he kind of foreshadowed that, right? Like he did become a famous rock star and his dad did decide to get a hold of him, but it didn't come off genuine.
Mhm.
It was pretty clear that he was using him for his money, for his addictions or whatnot. And it's been said too that he was possibly dealing with some physical issues as well as, you know, not just his addictions, but like they said that he probably was having some kind of physical issues on top of his mental issues, which is interesting because that also kind of correlates a lot to Kurt Cobain, who is known to have had a lot of stomach issues, which kind of spiraled his addiction, you know, dealing with his pain of his stomachs. So I thought that was also interesting. So, like, his death wasn't only sad, but like it was all there. You know what I mean? Like the signs were there. You could tell something was going on and he just couldn't get the help that he needed. Um I got to see them in concert when they reformed in 2006, and this was right after they reformed. And my brother actually gave me the tickets for my high school graduation gift. And we went together. It was a great experience. I felt like they had like a great look of like few bands that have that unique singer that they lose, and they managed to find somebody that's really damn close,
Mhm.
because I was shocked because I was like, "Oh, like, this guy's voice actually sounds really close," and it worked, and it
Mhm.
made it like a really great show. But I think this goes to show you too, just like more so of like sometimes the signs will be in front of you
Mhm.
when things are hard and difficult for somebody in their life. And I saw things where it said that people did try to reach out and help him, but he wasn't like willing necessarily. But at the same point, too, he could have been so in his issues at that point when the people were really trying to reach out that it was too late, you know? And basically, you know, you always keep in touch, like we always say that it's not always going to be the person that you expect, which is true. Okay. Like if you think of Adam's song from Blink
Mhm.
182, it could be very well the person that you see laughing and smiling. But at the same time, there are a lot of people who cannot mask in front of other people when you have mental issues or even physical, and both. And the signs are there. Sometimes, depending on when you start to reach out, is when it could be too late. And it's really sad. And basically, just always keep in touch with your friends, no matter if you feel like they seem like they're okay or not. Like, if you're there, talk to them and be there for them. And even if you're like feeling like they're having issues, and like for instance, when I brought up the whole idea that I think I have PDA with autism, where it's like the more you act like you're wanting me more forcibly to be like, go get help, the more I would reactively not want to get help. I see that a lot in issues like this too, where I'm wondering, like, could they have had like a PDA profile and they weren't diagnosed with autism or anything?
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And it's one of those things where if constantly trying to get them help in a manner of like constantly being, hey, like, let's go, isn't working, then maybe try a different method where you're available but not pushing them. I am not a doctor, okay? I am not a doctor. I am not telling you I know some magic formula, but I am somebody who has a brain that works a little differently. And sometimes, like, whether it's learning or just socializing might be a little different. So if one kind of way of helping isn't working, that means maybe there's another way to get help with them, you know what I mean? But yeah, I think their music is very effective, but unfortunately, I think sometimes it hits us in our darkest points. And if you have been through trauma or dark places or you battle with addiction, sometimes bands like these do hit you in a way that are very relative, and then sometimes they don't have a good outcome, you know but at the same time they're still very impactful. And even though it's really dark, sometimes it's good to get in touch with those feelings, which I'm learning about, by the way,
Mhm.
in therapy, as somebody who constantly makes jokes of their trauma. Like, I personally get in my feelings the most when I'm listening to music that does get into places that are dark and stuff, because then I'm like, okay, no, I'm getting in touch with these emotions that I need to be feeling. And yeah, that's my spiel. I
But
feel like I
I'm
got on a
no,
tangent, but
no, but I think it's so important because with Soundgarden and Chris Cornell, that was a lot of things, a lot of fans felt the same way where they knew he was going through so much and he was so open about that, and their music, everyone's like, "Oh," when they would interview Chris, they would be like, "Oh, you're not as dark as your music," and I
yeah.
think, yeah, you kinda hit it where people, and I think that kinda sums up the '90s and Alice in Chains in general too, that people that were going through stuff through music, and they saw these people that, were so open, whether it was Kurt Cobain or, just anybody, like, all these people, right? They've
Yeah.
all gone, like, Gavin Rossdale has talked about his depression too, and, like, I think in the 90s like that too, it was like, and not only that, it was so male driven. I mean, yes, we will talk
Yes.
about, I'll just say it. We're gonna have an episode
Yeah.
because I know some people are gonna say, why didn't you bring up females? Absolutely, we will,
Yeah.
because there are so many that have impacted us, and we will get to
Yeah.
those for sure. But like, I feel like this was such a male driven era too, to where these guys growing up seeing, you know, whether it was Alice in Chains or Soundgarden, Nirvana. I mean, again, I'll name 9 Inch Nails, any of these bands like that we've talked about, or bands we haven't, like Pearl Jam. Like,
Yes.
I
I was gonna
think,
say Pearl Jam was another one I thought
oh
about
my
talking
God,
about as well.
huge. Oh my God. And
Yes.
again, like I loved and love Pearl Jam. Like I think they're so great. And obviously, like I said, like doesn't mean that they didn't matter if we don't talk about them, but obviously,
Yes,
yes,
of
they
course.
are so impactful. But it's like hearing
There's just
that,
so many bands that
so
we
many, and
could have covered. And
it's
both me and you are very 90s
oh
music
my
driven.
God. Oh, and
And so
again, like that goes to show that like literally goes to show for us. And I know it's impacted us. Like when I see you pick the bands you have, and even when we talk about anything, it's like, okay, I see how that impacted her to be kind of this way or go that route, or especially when we talked about 9 Inch Nails on the last episode. It's like, oh God, for sure,
yeah.
Justine. Like, yes, yes. And like um in that aspect too. And it's like that's what's so interesting about these bands. And I loved that you brought light to that, and that, um we do, because I gravitate so many singers now in this era, right, that we're in right now. I hear them and I'm like, oh, well, I gravitate because they're kind of struggling right now. I'm kind of struggling right now, and their music is getting me through it. And I think it's just such a sad story about Alice in Chains and that,
It
like
really
it,
is.
yeah,
And I feel like it's, and like I kind of brought up a little bit, it's strange how much it was reoccurring of a situation, especially in the grunge genre,
yeah,
that we have all of these people that have a lot of the same struggles, right? Because like Kurt and Lane both had both physical and mental, and then you
hmm,
have Chris Cornell who had depression. Honestly, I think almost every 90s, especially grunge era, had an addiction of some sort.
yeah, oh yeah,
Because like obviously you have Scott Weiland who passed from his addictions
yeah,
as well. Um, and it's upsetting how much, especially in that genre, that was hit. And I just find that interesting, and the fact that like so many of us gravitate towards this genre in particular, especially from
hmm,
the 90s. It's because they were open, but at the same time, they didn't really know how to help themselves, you know?
hmm, yeah,
And I think as much as like it's awful and we're very sad about that, we always will be, but like maybe we can somehow learn from that
yeah,
to know how to approach it, you know? And I think we still have a lot to learn, especially when it comes to addiction, of how to approach people in addiction, especially if you're someone that hasn't been in addiction, how to approach it, you know? And I think the more, especially, any musicians or just anybody, whether it's musicians or actors or just everyday people that talk about it, I think will be helpful to help figure out how to help people more, to make it successful. And the more we are willing to listen and not judge people for being addiction, which I think
hmm,
is a really big problem,
yeah,
um, then maybe we will actually get somewhere with it, you know, and help each other, but also be able to help people that are in a situation that we haven't been in. Because I personally have never been in addiction, but I have never wanted to judge somebody for being in addiction. You know what I mean? So, as somebody who deals with chronic illness and mental illness, and seeing people like Kurt Cobain and Lane that ends up in addiction because of those struggles, I know that I could have very well ended in that situation, you know? So I think the first step is understanding that people that get an addiction are not horrible people.
Yeah, I love what you said there too, because I think anyone listening to that too, it is because a lot of times, whether it is mental illness or a lot of these singers that did suffer addiction, that um, people, whether it's mental illness or addiction, people are trying. And I think we have to understand that even when we from the outside don't think that they are very much trying. These things are very difficult, and again, I've never suffered addiction, but I have, people close to me that have, so it's like watching them go through that and, also being the person on the other side, right? That I think I have a lot of things, "Oh, this'll help," or, "Oh, I should be doing this," and, like, also
Mhm.
understanding that it's their journey and kind of just being respectful too. So, like, that's number 1, like, always just remember to be respectful, and I think when we look back at all these singers, like, it is really interesting to see how many were really suffering and we were listening, but even though they were suffering so bad, whether it was addiction, mental health, or anything, that they were still, like, up there and creating this art that is now helping so many others have comfort when they couldn't have comfort themselves at times, and I think that's just such a really heavy thing to think about too, right? Like, and I think
Yeah.
it just is. So I think I loved what you said about that because it's so important, and I think, again, at the end of the day, just being respectful,
Yeah.
because you just don't
Like, just
know.
because that wasn't your path, like I said, like, I could have very easily have resulted
Mhm,
to addiction for everything I've gone through,
sure.
and but I recognize that I could have, and just because you didn't take a path doesn't mean you couldn't have.
Mhm.
So I think that's really important to remember when it comes to these things. But like me and Lisa even kind of had a little talk earlier about how like when you go through trauma and things like that, a lot of times you might do things that are a little toxic and hurtful to others.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're a horrible person. It just means you're trying to navigate your issues at the moment and you might not see how that'll impact others. And I think that's part of it as well. Because obviously you see these stories of people in addiction who do end up having issues, whether they're going to steal to fuel their addiction or, just harm others in that time. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're horrible people. They're trying to figure out what to do, basically. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
it deserves a little bit of grace and understanding rather than attacking them for it necessarily. Obviously, you need to have boundaries, but at the same time, you shouldn't assume that everybody who is in addiction or trying to overcome addiction are horrible people because it's not the case. Usually, addiction happens because of things like mental illness or physical illness and trying to cope with that and just trying to find new coping skills. And I think that's something really important to remember.
No, I think so too, and I love that we're kind of ending it on that note for anyone listening too, because, like, it's so important, and I think when we look at these artists too that have made such an impact, and then you look at their lives, like with Lane, he was someone that, like, that story just always, not that anybody else didn't, but that one
Yeah.
particularly got me where it was like, wow, like,
It
and
gets really upsetting, and the more
yeah.
I read into it too, I was just like, "Oh my gosh," and
Mhm.
I think that's another thing that too that kind of hit me even harder because, like, towards the end, he, like, wasn't wanting to leave his house, he didn't wanna talk to people, and as somebody who struggles with mental illness and autism, like, we have the tendency to shut people out when we're struggling at our hardest, and we tend to isolate ourselves, and I can only imagine, like, what he was going through, and as somebody who does that herself to an extent, like I said, I'm not in addiction, I haven't been in addiction, but I do self-isolate when I am dealing with life stressors, and I think that that's something maybe to notice as well from others, is that if you have a friend and you're noticing that they aren't really maybe they used to be very, you know, high social media people and they're not online as much, or if they're just not taking calls as much or texting as much. Um, I feel like that's a pretty good sign that something's going on. Like they could be just busy, but at the same time, they could be busy while struggling. And I think that's super important to remember. And the more we hear about people that are open about things like that, especially with like the self isolation, I think the more important that that is, so we can figure out how to help approach it. You know what I mean?
No, for sure. And I think that's all that is. And I think it's so important what's being said because it truly is. And I hope anyone listening that is struggling with anything like that, that at least you have two people here that truly, although we don't know what you're going through, we have that respect and compassion because it's something we won't ever understand. Um and we hope that you hear that too and you understand that you're not alone in that fight either because I know like you said a lot of people do think people that suffer from that oh they're just this or oh they're just that. So I think
Yeah.
it's really important to know that. So I hope that anyone listening to that um like I said, I have people close to me that have battled for a long time and it's um just so much respect for anyone just getting up every day and like when you're battling that. And I think that's something we don't understand. And I think that's something we should also understand with music too. Like we said before, that like these people were really suffering and we're buying concert tickets or like we get mad at them, even artists today, right? We get mad if they don't play a song we like or whatever it is. And
Yeah.
maybe they are struggling and how like, in their lives and they get up there enough to get on stage and then we want to complain about whatever. And it's like when you look at these artists that we've tragically lost, um, and what they were going through and they were still getting up there, whether it was for their own cathartic process of singing songs or um, for whatever reason they were getting up there. But and then to go through that and read like a media thing, like I couldn't imagine. So my heart just goes out to anyone that has gone through anything. But and sorry to bring it down, but it's so important to talk about these things. So I'm so glad you brought that up. And I'm glad we could talk about Alice in Chains this time around because very,
Yeah.
very important. All these bands have been important. So I guess we'll just kind of end it and say too that all these are important. And yes, there's hip hop and rap that we didn't touch on, just as important too. Yes.
Yeah.
And then the females, like I said, like trust me, pop music too.
I
We
was
did
gonna
not
say there's pop.
we did not forget.
I I know absolutely not. Like I I think we could definitely have like a 90s, maybe not even 90s, but just like a pop episode
Yeah,
sometime in the future because then we can cover a lot more. We have so many ideas, guys.
I
So don't
know.
worry. If just because we don't cover it in one
Mhm.
episode doesn't mean we won't in a different episode.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, there's so much. So it's like really exciting, but I hope you guys enjoyed this one because this was fun to get this different mix too and to do it. And what a good time too for 90s. Now I think maybe I'll listen to a little more Alice in Chains today and just be in the feels a little bit and like, wow, like, like what they created during all that darkness. So I think
Yes.
for sure. That's on my agenda for sure. But if anybody else too, please check out these bands if you have not and you have been living under the rock or you were just young or you just it was not your cup of tea. Maybe you can dive back in because these are all important, iconic bands that meant so much and mean so much to so many people and to the music as a whole. So definitely check them out. I'll post all the links below as usual and the blog too. I'll post some of that Allie Hagendorf, her um, stuff with Billy Corgan because that was really cool. So I'll post all that. But as always, we have new episodes every Tuesday. So we will see you guys next Tuesday or whatever day you listen to this, a Tuesday. You will see us and we will see you guys next time. Bye guys.
Bye.